Okay, so if you can get, there you go. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. If you'll go to the next slide, I want to let you know who I am and why I was asked to present to you today. I'm a former counselor from MRS in the South Oakland office. I was there about 8 years, and since then I've been working as a social worker specializing in addiction. I am currently the program coordinator of community education at Henry Ford Maple Grove Center, which is located in West Bloomfield. We are part of I'm also part of the clinical treatment team, and Henry Ford Maple Grove Center is the chemical dependency program, inpatient and outpatient, for Henry Ford in West Bloomfield. So I was asked to come here today to share some information with you that will assist you in making smart choices as you seek and maintain employment. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is addiction or substance use disorder or chemical dependency? You're going to hear all those terms, and basically they're pretty much interchangeable, but the term substance use disorder is the medical term for a person who has an addiction to alcohol or other drugs. Alcohol is a drug. Many people don't know that, but drugs do three things. They change the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act. And alcohol absolutely does that. So alcohol is a drug. So when you hear those terms, they're pretty much used interchangeably. So addiction is a disease. It is not a choice. It is not a character flaw or weakness. It is not a criminal mind. It is truly a disease recognized as such by the American Medical Association in 1966. And this is a disease that is chronic, meaning once you have it, you always have it. Even if you're clean and sober for the next 30 years, the disease is still in your body. It's still there. And if you were to start using again, the disease would pick up where it left off. So just like any other chronic illness like diabetes or heart disease, addiction is a chronic illness. This disease is progressive, means it gets worse over time. So if a person continues to use and develops an addiction and does not treat it and does not stop using, it is guaranteed to be worse over time, because that's the nature of a progressive illness. This disease is familial, which means it runs in families. It's highly genetic. So there's no guarantee that because it runs in your family, you will have it, but you're born at a higher risk and must be aware of that, just like you would be aware of any other medical condition in your family, and you need to be particularly careful. And this disease is fatal. Unfortunately, people die, not just of an overdose, but of medical problems associated with addiction and accidents and injuries and other problems like that. The good news is it's treatable, and it's very successfully treatable if a person is motivated to get help and follows what they're directed to do. So some of you may have heard some of these terms. The more a person uses, their tolerance increases. So for example, maybe I'm an alcoholic, and when I first started drinking, I would drink one beer, and that would be enough to get me a little buzzed. And over time, it took me 2, and then 3, and then 4. So my tolerance is increasing. And I'm using that example with alcohol, but it's true of any drug. Blackouts are when a person functions normally, but they may not remember much about it at all. So for example, I'm out partying at night. I wake up in the morning in my pajamas, and I don't remember how I got home. I don't remember how I changed my clothes. And bits and pieces of my night might come back to me, but not the whole picture. So that's a blackout. And withdrawal symptoms are very, very uncomfortable when a person has a substance use disorder and they stop using their drug. Their body is going to feel it. So they're going to have uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms like shakes, nausea, sweating, nervousness, diarrhea, headaches, and physical pain. So very, very uncomfortable, and nobody wants to feel that discomfort. So to alleviate the discomfort, they use again. So what is the difference between use and abuse and physical dependence and addiction? Well, we all know people who use alcohol socially, and many people use marijuana socially. And what does that mean? Just for fun, recreationally. They like the effect it has on the body, and they just do it for enjoyment. Okay, that's substance use. But abuse is when a person uses drugs that are not legal, or they use too much, they use for the wrong reasons, like to cope with problems. But a person who's abusing still can quit using. And what is physical dependence? Well, physical dependence is when the drug is in the body and a person who stopped using is going to feel the uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms, or if they decrease their use, they're going to feel uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. And people who are physically dependent are not necessarily addicted. So let's say, for example, that I have an athletic injury and my doctor prescribes pain pills like opioids, and I take them as directed, and then I stop taking them because my pain is gone or my prescription ends, I might have some shakes and nausea, nervousness, sweating, and other types of withdrawal symptoms because I'm physically dependent. But that doesn't mean I'm addicted. But when you cross the line, and the line, it can't be defined by any particular person, it's different for everybody. But when you cross into addiction, you have what we call a chronic relapsing illness. Okay, this is characterized by compulsive behaviors of using, continued use despite negative consequences. So bad things happen, like people get fired from a job, or they crash the car, or they get arrested. Okay, and yet they continue to use. Most people would say after any one of those activities, I need to stop, but they continue to use. And the reason is because they can't stop. And lastly, it's characterized by long-lasting changes in the brain because addiction impacts the brain. So next slide, please. Okay, so what is marijuana? Marijuana has been around forever. It's a plant. People use the dried leaves, the flowers, the stems, and seeds from different plants. And in the plant is a chemical called THC. Okay, that is the chemical that creates the high. Okay, so extracts can also be made from the cannabis plant. We'll be talking about that in a minute. So how do people use marijuana? Well, they smoke it in a joint, or in a pipe, or in a water pipe or bong, or in empty cigars called blunts. Some people use hookahs, and I'm sure that everyone has heard now about electronic cigarettes or vapes. These are really common devices for people to use marijuana. But marijuana can also be put into food like cereal, brownies, cookies, candy, or brew it as a tea, and we call these edibles. The problem with edibles is it takes longer to enter the system than someone who smokes. So for example, someone eats a brownie, nothing happens. So they eat another brownie and nothing happens. And they eat a third brownie, and now number 1 kicks in, and number 2 kicks in, and number 3 kicks in, and they are very, very high. So just be aware that it takes longer when you're ingesting it than when you're smoking it. Next slide. So marijuana extracts. So what happens is people are using the very high THC, which was not around when I was young. Okay, the THC is, the marijuana plants now are grown intentionally to be much more strong. And what they're taking is they're extracting the THC and they're making other chemicals. Okay, like you might hear the term hash oil or honey oil, wax, butter, shatter. And these are really dangerous. People get sent to the emergency room all the time because the high is so powerful and so dangerous to our bodies. And part of preparing these extracts is that people have to use butane, which is a lighter fluid. And there's fires and explosions that have been caused by people who have used this. And I will tell you, a couple summers ago, this happened in my neighborhood. A house blew up because they were creating these products with butane. Next slide, please. So how does marijuana impact the brain? Well, when someone smokes, the THC goes from the lungs into the bloodstream, and of course the blood goes throughout the body, so it goes into every organ, including the brain. So the body absorbs THC more slowly when the person eats or drinks it, as we said. So generally, they're going to feel the effects quicker if they're smoking than if they're eating it. So what happens is the THC acts on certain brain cell receptors, okay? And what it feels like is a natural chemical. So these chemicals play a role in our normal brain development and functioning. So when you're putting THC into your brain, you're impacting your normal brain development and functioning. So what happens is over time, 20, 30 minutes, it activates the brain and the receptors, and that's how people feel high, the high that we hear about. Now, some of you may have heard that our brains are not fully developed until we reach the mid-20s. And people who start using marijuana prior to the age of 25 is introducing this chemical of THC into the brain before the brain is fully developed. And what is that doing to the brain? It's priming it for a future of addiction. Okay? Because what this drug does is it impairs thinking and memory, learning, and we'll talk more about the other areas that it impacts in a person's functioning. So people who start smoking as teens pretty heavily lose an average of 8 IQ points. An IQ is our intelligence quotient. It measures our ability to learn and remember information. So if the average IQ is 100 and a person is an early marijuana smoker, they're going to lose 8 points. Now their IQ is 92 and it doesn't fully return. So a person who is using as a teen, these mental abilities stay lost. They did not see these results in studies with adults. Next slide, please. So these are some short-term effects of marijuana use. So you'll look that over for yourself quickly. And when you see the word hallucination, that means hearing things that are not really there, seeing things that are not really there, or feeling things on your body that are not really there. And having a delusion is a belief that you hold strongly to that other people don't agree with, and it is contradicted by reality. So you've heard people say he's delusional. That's what that means. And psychosis means being out of touch with reality. Okay, it's people who continue to use marijuana are likely to become psychotic. Next slide, please. So the long-term effects of marijuana, obviously it can affect breathing. We all know that if you're a tobacco smoker, it's going to put you at a higher risk of cancer, lung infections, lung disease, and the same thing can happen with marijuana because people who smoke are putting these chemicals into their lungs, and these chemicals don't belong in our lungs. So it can create some long-term breathing problems. It can affect heart rate, increase the rate of heart attack. And of course, the older you are, the more dangerous it can be for your heart. People who are pregnant could have a baby with a lower birth rate, behavioral problems in that child, problems with attention, memory, and problem solving, and preterm births are a concern, meaning the baby being born too early. And this is going to sound crazy to you, but I have witnessed it myself, intense nausea and vomiting. So there's a syndrome called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where people who use marijuana heavily long-term have severe stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, and they go to the emergency room and there's nothing wrong. They do every test known to man and they can't find anything wrong. And the only thing that relieves the discomfort is stopping use or hot showers. Okay, if you don't believe me, look it up. Okay, I'm serious about this. This is the only thing that seems to relieve this discomfort. And I will tell you that I have worked with many patients at Maple Grove Center who report these symptoms, and any emergency room doctor will tell you that they're seeing people with these problems. And also long-term effect of marijuana is it can affect you mentally. It can cause you to hallucinate, have anxiety, paranoia, where you feel that people are coming after you or people are out to get you. And of course, if you already have a severe mental health disorder like schizophrenia, it's going to make that worse as well. Next slide, please. So, marijuana is legal in Michigan. It is legal for recreational purposes and it is legal for medicinal purposes if a person is 21 and older, but that does not mean it's safe. Just like alcohol is legal in Michigan for anyone who's 21 and older, there are some people who should not be drinking alcohol because for them it's not safe. And marijuana can be addictive. When I was a kid, when I was a young adult, it could not be addictive. The THC in marijuana at that time was not nearly strong enough, but today it's intentionally grown to be stronger and it is addictive. And you may have heard the term gateway drug. Okay, a gateway is like opening up the gates to other drugs. So people typically start using with tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, and those are considered gateway drugs. I'm here to tell you that I've yet to meet someone who started with heroin. They start with these drugs and then they move on to the harder drugs. So people who are using marijuana, it's a gateway drug toward other drugs. And if you already have a physical problem or a cognitive problem or an emotional problem that challenges your employability and you're a marijuana user, your marijuana use will likely add to these challenges. So I get asked all the time, what is CBD? So CBD, you may have heard of CBD oils, and there's CBD edibles, but they do not have THC. They do not have the active ingredient in marijuana that gets people high. So CBD cannot get a person high. So we'll talk about drug testing, and CBD will not show up in drug testing, but THC will. Next slide, please. So here's a bunch of problems that somebody may have on the job if they're a marijuana user, either if they're using regularly or they're using on the job. They may have problems with attendance and punctuality, may have accidents and injuries, poor judgment, lack of energy or motivation. We call that amotivational syndrome. They could have memory problems, coordination and balance problems, which could lead to falls or other injuries, moodiness, problems getting along with other people, trouble problem solving, and other long-term health problems. So an employer who witnesses any of these symptoms in an employee may perceive that substance use is to blame for it. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the perspective of employers. Hiring and training someone is very, very expensive. It takes a lot of time and effort. So employers want to hire the best possible candidate because once they're hired, they want them to remain employed there. So to do this, the employers expect and are looking for sober, productive employees who come to work on time every day and function at their best. So if you think back to that last slide, if you have any of those behaviors on the job, you're not punctual and you're not functioning at your best. So employers want to have a safe environment for their employees and their customers, in part because they want to avoid accidents and injuries, they want to avoid workman's comp claims, and they want to avoid getting sued. Okay. Many of them, of course, also care about people and they want there to be a safe environment because they care about the people who are there. Employers also desire to build and maintain a positive workplace reputation and avoid bad publicity. So if bad things happen on the job repeatedly because people are using drugs, it's likely to make the news and they want to avoid that. Plus, many employers care about their lifelong work and they want to have a good reputation. An employee who is under the influence or hungover will definitely have job performance issues. It will change the way you perform on the job. And an employer who's aware of this will be aware that this person is not perceived as a good employee by the employer. So an employee who wants to put their best foot forward cannot do so if they're using marijuana or other drugs. Next slide, please. So let's talk about drug testing. Do employers have the right to drug test current employees and people who are applying for a job, prospective employers? And the answer to this is yes. And many of them will tell you in advance that we have a policy that we are going to hire people only after they pass a drug test. So some people who know they can't pass a drug test won't even apply. So drug testing is very expensive, okay, but it's worth it to employers because it can save them money in medical costs and problems with productivity on the job and absenteeism, etc. But not all employers test because it is very expensive. So someone who's applying for a job might have a pre-employment drug test that's required. And what they do is they're trying to determine, does this prospective employee use illegal drugs or abuse prescription medication? Okay, it may also be used for employees who are returning to work after an injury or an absence. So it may be required to return to the job. Now, let's say that I am on medication. I'm on a pain medication because I had an athletic injury and my doctor prescribed it. If I can prove that I am on that medication prescribed by a doctor, I will test positive, but they will still allow me to work because I can prove that it was for a medical condition. Okay, employers can also test a current employee at any time for any reason. Now, typically, they won't do this for no reason unless the employer's, the employer's agreement is to random test. Random means they'll pick people randomly, not because you're showing signs that you're under the influence, not because you're a poor employee, but just because they want to check it out. And of course, if you are showing signs of being under the influence, they are very likely to test you unless you admit that you have been using. Then they might save the money and not have you tested. So someone who refuses to undergo drug testing, if an employer requires it, probably won't be hired. Okay, because if it's a choice between you who refuses to be tested and someone else who is willing to be tested and passes, they're more likely to go to that other person. A current employee who refuses to undergo drug testing could lose his job because the employer views this the same as testing positive. If you have nothing to hide, why wouldn't you agree to be tested? Next slide, please. So how are drug tests conducted? There's several ways. A urine drug screen is the most common. An employer will send you to a lab where you may be monitored, which means somebody may watch you as you urinate in a cup. And then, or they may watch you through a two-way window. Your urine is then tested for multiple drugs, and this is called a drug panel. So you'll be tested for sedatives and marijuana and opioids and many other drugs. Okay, usually it's a 12-panel drug screen, but they can do more or less. So your urine is tested, and if there's no drugs in your system, you pass. If there is drugs in your system, you fail. Another one is a blood test. This is very uncommon because it's very costly. It means going to a doctor's office or a lab or a hospital, and it's very invasive. So while they can do a drug test, it's not that common. A hair follicle test is where they remove a piece of your hair from your scalp and they test the roots going back about 3 months. So if you have drugs in your system, they're going to be able to detect it. And a saliva test is where they take a swab of the inside of your mouth, collecting saliva, and then they test the saliva to determine whether or not you use drugs. And some of the saliva tests I'm aware of are pretty quick. You know, they can get the results within 15 minutes. A breathalyzer is a test for alcohol only. Okay, so a breathalyzer is a machine. The police have these breathalyzers with them when they stop people on the road, but employers can have a machine or a lab can have a machine. and they ask people to breathe into it. And the way they somehow they determine whether there is alcohol in your blood based on your breath that's in this machine. Now, some drugs remain in the body a very short time. Okay, so in other words, 2 to 4 to 6 hours after use, it's in and out of your body. So if you're tested many hours after you use, you might test positive, even though, negative, even though it could be still in your body, very minimally. But marijuana remains in your body for about 30 days. Okay, it's stored in our fat cells, and I'm not saying that you're fat or you're not fat. We all have fat cells, and that's how it's stored. So be aware that if you stop using marijuana 2 weeks ago because you know you have an interview today and you're going to be drug tested today, you could still test positive because it's only been 14 days. It hasn't been 30. And some employers, like my employer, the Henry Ford Health System, will do a nicotine test and will not hire a nicotine user. So they have the right to do that. So the way drug tests work, they're either positive or negative for each substance on the panel. But with marijuana, it's different. You test positive, but there's a corresponding numerical number with each positive result. And the higher the number, the more regular the use. So if a person's number is 0, it is very likely that they have not used marijuana in the past 30 days. If it's a little bit higher than 0, maybe they did use earlier, but they haven't used recently. But the higher the number, the more regular the use. And I can tell you that our patients, many of them are over 1,000 is their number. So you know that they're using regularly. Next slide, please. So what if you can't stop using? And there are plenty of people who can't because this is an addictive substance. So there's help available. The stigma is reduced. The COVID-19 crisis has made things worse. There's therapy with a talk therapist. There's treatment programs, rehabilitation programs. Insurance usually covers all or part. And if a person has Medicaid or no insurance or they're indigent, you can always access help through the community mental health program, and your MRS counselor can help you with that. So moving on, I want to talk to you about some trends that I'm seeing in the rehab world based on some of the people that I work with who are patients at Maple Grove Center. So next slide, please. Okay, the using employee has a skewed perspective of his job performance and behavior. So in other words, an employee can think he's doing just fine. He's not acting strange or different, yet everybody in the workplace is well aware before he is that he is behaving differently. So absenteeism, tardiness, it could be slurred speech, falling asleep on the job, trouble with balance or coordination. These are some pretty obvious signs to an employer or a coworker that this person's under the influence. But the employee may deny it because they think they can hide it, and that is not true. Many employers truly care about the using employee and want him to get help, especially if the employee's been there long term. So we've had many patients who have, out of concern, the employer will say, look, we believe you have a problem and we want you to get help. And if you go get help, you won't lose your job. Okay, so many employers will work with the employee, give them a chance to get help for the addiction, and then allow them to return to the job. But that's not always the case. Some employees will fire a long-term employee. And some of our patients come from employee assistance programs, which many employers offer to help patients employees with a personal problem or a job-related problem. And many of these programs do help people get help for their addiction. A resume with many short-term jobs because someone has been fired frequently is a red flag for employers. Okay, getting a job may not be so hard. Maintaining employment may be difficult, especially for someone who's got a substance use disorder or they're developing a substance use disorder. So it's a red flag to an employer for someone who can't keep a job. And this we see all the time. Lying on an application about substance-related legal issues is not wise. And why is that? Because an employer has access to a computer and can do background checks, which include a legal history and a review of your driving record. So lying to an employer isn't going to be very successful for most people. Most employers do a pretty good job of checking up on people. Next slide, please. Okay, before using someone as a reference, ask them if they're willing to give you a good reference. You absolutely don't want a bad reference, but a former employer may share the fact that you were fired on the job or because you used on the job, and that person is not going to give you a good reference. So don't sabotage yourself by putting his name and phone number down unless you know that it's going to be a good reference. Okay, this we see all the time. A prospective employee wrongfully assumes that he can beat a drug test, okay? Because an employee could say, well, I drank tea. Or a woman might say, well, I diluted my urine sample, meaning I added water to it or special chemicals to it. But the problem is the drug tests have things built in to detect when it's been tampered with. So if it's not a normal sample, it will be detected. So if someone says, here, try this tea, or try to add water or use someone else's urine, it can be detected. So same thing on the saliva test, the blood test, the breathalyzers, they accurately operate. So thinking you can beat a test from an employer or from the police, you're not likely to be successful. A prospective employee may believe that testing positive for marijuana is fine since it's legal for medicinal purposes and recreational purposes. But an employer could decide they don't want to hire him, and that is entirely legal. An employer has the right to say no. Keep in mind, and we see this all the time at work as well, not all working environments are substance-free. There are employers that condone or participate in substance use. I recently heard of an employer who provided cocaine as a Christmas present to the employees. So if you're in this type of environment, you might want to ask yourself if this is a healthy environment for you. Do you want to be there? Should you be there? Also, if you're choosing to be in that environment and associating with other people there who are using or selling drugs, what are the potential legal consequences for you? You might want to think about that before you decide to stay in an unhealthy and unsafe environment. And lastly, if you have a substance use disorder, okay, you are under no obligation to share this with your employer. Just like you don't need to share necessarily that you have kidney disease or diabetes or heart disease, okay? Any medical condition that you have is personal protected medical data, and you don't have to share that information. If you want to share it, you are certainly welcome to. That's your choice. And many of our patients do share it because the employer already knows, but you are under no obligation to do so. So if we have any questions or comments, or are we going to wait till the end for that?
We're going to wait to the end. Thank you so much, Ms. Kaplan.
You are welcome.
We are now going to hear from our employers. They'll give their perspectives on why they choose or choose not to do pre-employment drug screenings. So if Mr. Hughes from the Stuffed Bell Pepper Company can go first to give us his perspective on why he either chooses to or not choose to drug test his employees or potential employees. Mr. Hughes?
I don't think Marlon is with us, Teresa, today.
Well, can we have Ms. Lewis from CIS Automotive?
You sure can. Let me try to get this all put together.
Okay.
Okay, well, I don't know. Anyway, hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Turner Lewis, and I'm the president of Superior Innovative Solutions. We call it CIS Automotive. And essentially what we do is a lot of industrial cleaning, waste management, and janitorial work for a lot of the automotive companies at this point in time. And why we do drug training or string screening, I should say, is very important because first of all, it's a prerequisite for our employers to make sure that everyone is functioning 100% at work. There could be potential problems in reference to safety, obviously, which is number one with each and every one of our employers. And from a lawsuit perspective, obviously workman's comp, those were excellent reasons why, but it is safety. It's safety for yourself and safety for others. And the drug screening really gives our client, who again mandates it, the opportunity to make sure that that is one piece of the puzzle that is taken care of before our employees start a job. And so it happens long before we get to the situation where people are not showing up or anything of that nature. It is a prerequisite for our employment at any of the automotive companies in particular, that each and every one of our employees have drug screening, and they do random screening too on a regular basis.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, guys. And that was a great presentation. I appreciated that. It was a lot of good information.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
We will now have Mr. Huntley. Is Mr. Huntley with us from the Oakwood Group?
No, Eric is not here either, Teresa.
Okay. Well, we do have some perspective. We did speak to some employers that couldn't be here today, but they did give their perspectives on why they choose to drug test. And one perspective was because they have federal contracts. And as we know that marijuana use is not federally legal. And so companies that have receive federal contracts or federal funding, they are mandated to drug test their employees. So also local, state, and federal government offices or government agencies are required to test their employees or potential employees as well. So now we will have Jackie Smith, business relations consultant from the Business Network Division of Michigan Rehabilitation Services, discussing with us federal and local laws and employment.
Good afternoon, everybody. As stated, my name is Jackie Smith, and I am the Business Relations Consultant with the Business Network Division for the Detroit area. I will be reviewing the differences between federal and local laws regarding legal drug usage, specifically THC, and its impact on employment. On December 6th of 2018, in the state of Michigan, the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act became law, and it legalized the use and possession and the transfer of recreational marijuana, excuse me, by persons 21 and older in Michigan. The act created a huge dilemma for employers and employees alike, mostly because state and federal laws contradict one another. The Federal Controlled Substance Act or law that states marijuana is a Schedule I drug, and Schedule I drugs have been deemed to, as they say, lack any accepted medical use. Therefore, federal law prohibits marijuana's manufacturing, distribution, and possession. Federal law always supersedes local law. So with that being said, to clear up any misconceptions, employers are not, as stated earlier, employers are not required to accommodate marijuana use at the workplace or to allow an employee to work under the influence of marijuana. Employers that perform testing may find or may fire an employee that is testing positive for marijuana on a drug test, even when the use of the drug was off duty and the employee has a valid medical marijuana card. Certain industries, as was just recently stated, are covered and required by the federal drug testing procedures. They are used uniformly prohibited from using marijuana at any given time. A lot of the workers that are covered under this work under the Department of Transportation, which will include jobs such as trucking, mass transit, airlines, the railways, and things of that nature. They all must be screened for marijuana or all drugs and alcohol in order to ensure safety, and for anybody else that are in a safety sensitive job. So maybe if you were working in an office setting in any of those industries, the policy on that may look a little differently than if you were a pilot flying a plane. Other industries that abide by these rules will include education and the healthcare system. Next slide, please. I want to take time to talk about the perspective from the ADA. Oftentimes, employees may assume that because they are or have a marijuana card and that they are exempt from abiding by federal law, or that their company's drug use policy will be ineffective or not apply to them. Or that the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, will protect them from being fired by their employer because their marijuana is disability related. But this is a misconception. According to the Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA, they require employers to provide reasonable accommodations to enable workers with disabilities to perform the essential functions of their jobs. And the definition of covered disabilities includes many of the conditions that marijuana is treated to use, or is used to treat. But with the ADA, they do not protect employees who use drugs that are illegal under the Controlled Substance Act, which, as we stated before, based on the law, includes cannabis or THC. So, in order for the ADA in order for you to be protected by the ADA, the use of drugs under a physician's supervision must be authorized by the Controlled Substance Act, which is the federal law. It does not allow the use of marijuana, and therefore there is no protection under the ADA. These practices and law contradictions can cause a huge dilemma for employers. So as noted earlier, many employers are seeking to explore and to revamp their policies on chemical use and trying to find ways to eliminate them altogether or to do whatever is necessary to meet their employment needs. If an employer engages in a chemical use and impairment testing policy, they should consider the following. They should do things such as start off with a very clearly written policy regarding chemical use and impairment, train their managers to spot signs of impairment so that they're not just discriminating towards anybody in particular. Talk to an attorney about relevant state laws before policy and testing rules are established and implemented. Educate all of the employees about the company's marijuana use policy and the repercussions for failing tests, including random, post-accident, and reasonable suspicion testing. In a nutshell, the ultimate goal of all of these measures is to create a safe working environment and to evaluate safety risks within the workplace. And I just wanted to speak briefly on the fact that we had a couple of guests that were going to talk about the no drug use policy within their company. And some of that was covered earlier. And basically, a lot of it has to do with the needs of employees as well as the financial costs that they would have to ensure in order to keep up with all of the laws. Teresa, thank you.
So we do have a couple of questions. So one question is, if an employer can test at any time and a person can be fired for failing a test, does that mean that although marijuana is legal, it is effectively banned for most working people?
Okay, so I can answer that. I would say some employers don't care. Some employers are okay with it. They may have certain rules like you can't use on the job, you can't bring it onto our property, but many employers will not not will choose not to not hire someone. They will still hire someone if they have a positive drug test for marijuana. The other thing the employer could do is see how high is that number I was talking about. If the number is lower, it indicates recreational use. That's a little different than someone whose number is sky high, which recognizes, very severe frequent use.
Another question is, if a person fails a drug test while applying for a job, is there like a database where companies share that failed test with other entities?
I have never heard of that. Jacqueline, how about you?
I have not heard of that specifically, but I do know that there is a medical, as you will, TRW that exists that insurance company use, but I can't say that that's available to employees to discriminate against anyone. So in other words, medical records may be out there, but I don't know that employers have access to that.
Okay. That is it. We have someone that asked if will this recording be shared, but I don't think it's being recorded. If you have any more questions, there's still a little time to put them in the chat. Is there anything that any of our presenters would like to add? Any other additional information?
I just want to say thank you for having me here today. And I'm available as a resource for anybody who needs it, anybody who wants to talk privately. My name is Lisa, and I'm at Henry Ford Maple Grove Center in West Bloomfield.
And I would like to add that as a customer or someone who's interested in employment, this will be a good opportunity for you to engage with your MRS counselor or medical healthcare professional or whatever entity is helping you to job search, and do research on the company prior to applying for employment so that you will be able to find out whether or not they have a drug use policy, what that policy is, and if it's something that is important enough for you based on your personal circumstances to adjust your lifestyle and or to be prepared to answer whatever questions they may have about your usage, and whether or not you're a good fit for that company based on your current status. And then I also would like to say thank you to the Detroit Area District for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. Great discussion, great presentation, and a lot of good information.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions that have come in. One question is, how does marijuana usage affect services with Michigan Rehabilitation Services? Well, we don't deny a person services because of their, marijuana usage. What we have to do is provide information to our customers to make informed choices. That information could mean if they choose to continue using marijuana, that their employment opportunities could be limited. Working in certain industries could be limited. You know, we give them information such as this about the legal ramifications so they can make that decision. And as Jackie indicated, also research companies that may be a better fit for them. But in terms of MRS services, we cannot deny them because they are using marijuana. Another question is, can you share some information for those customers that are here and may need treatment? How can they access services?
Okay, I'm assuming you mean substance abuse treatment. So anybody who has private insurance can get help through their insurance company. They can be referred to a treatment provider and their insurance will pay at least part of their treatment. But someone who has Medicaid or is indigent can also get help through their county's community mental health program. So every county has a pot of money set aside to help people who need this service. So all you need to do is look up for whatever county you're in, Wayne County, Oakland County, your community mental health program, and there should be a number that says access to substance abuse treatment. They'll start off by doing an assessment over the phone, and then they can refer you to appropriate resources.
Great, thank you. We do have Mr. Hughes from the Stuffed Bell Pepper Company. He has joined us and he would like to give his perspective to us on why he chooses not to do pre-drug screening. Mr. Hughes?
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for participating.
Oh, no problem.
You can go ahead and give us your perspective on why you choose, I think you choose not to do pre-employment drug screening.
I think we lost him for a little minute, Teresa. His screen went blank and he's on mute, so you might
Okay.
give him a second.
So I'll look to see if there are any more questions in the chat.
Have to love technology and have a lot of,
Exactly.
so hopefully he'll come back on.
Hello?
Oh, you're back. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. We lost you for a minute.
All right, give me 1 second.
Okay.
Hey, I'm back now. Hello?
Yes, we're here. So we would like to hear from you as an employer, why you choose to, is it not, or choose to do pre-employment drug screening?
Well, I choose to not do pre-employment drug screening. I do all my interviews on my own. My thing about the drugs is we got drugs that's disguised as food, and there's no way for me to check somebody that's addicted to food. You know what I'm saying? And so I just choose not to judge or pre-screen anyone from drugs. I got a good judge of character, and I don't feel it's necessary. You know, marijuana is legal. I can't really screen. People can tell me that they're using prescription drugs and they're more harmful than street drugs. But if I was to screen someone with a prescription drug habit, I couldn't discriminate because they declared that they were taking prescription drugs. And those are drugs, legal or illegal, that could have a person endangering themselves or others. And that's just my view upon it.
Okay. And do you notice any difference in terms of you not drug screening, in terms of your employees' performance?
No, not necessarily. Like I say, I have a good judge of character, and I really want people to come into this place that I have organically, and to prejudge them for drug use, or I don't think I should be that invasive. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Okay. Well, we
I
are
mean,
so glad that.
I used to work for the government, so it was drug screen there, and
Mhm.
but 60% of the people I worked with were on other types of drugs that were legal, like sugar and alcohol and fats. And they taking high blood pressure medicines, diabetes medicines, and they were more of a danger or a liability than those that were using street drugs. That's just how it is.
Mr. Hughes, we appreciate your perspective. We were very excited to hear your perspective on not drug testing. We definitely understand both sides. And we are just grateful that you were able to give us your perspective. That gives us information. It also gives our participants on the call some things to think about as well.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it so much. We have one more question. I think we have time for one more question.
Teresa, can I ask the question of Mr. Hughes really quick?
Sure.
Can he tell us what line of work he works in? I mean, it's almost obvious with the name, but you never know. What type of work what line of work, what industry?
So I'm an owner of a restaurant. I sell healthier food. The Detroit Pepper Company. We're a healthy first restaurant. We start off everything in the restaurant starts off vegan, and so that's what line of work I'm in. I'm in a restaurant business, food service industry.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this last question. What is your suggestion on addressing drugs with an employer in terms of accommodations if one is receiving treatment? That's a good one.
One is receiving treatment.
Well, this can be, Ms. Kaplan, if you could maybe answer this one.
Well, I will say that there are employers who ask their employee to sign a release of information, allowing them to have information from a treatment provider, a therapist, or a rehab program, not personal information about the person's treatment, but the fact that they were admitted and discharged successfully. So that way, if they send an employee to treatment and the employee has completed treatment and now they want their job back, the employer can feel comfortable knowing that they have successfully completed. So that would be my recommendation, is to ask the employee to sign a release of information so that the employer can get information to make him more comfortable to allow the employee back at work.
Now, I know I said one more question, but this one is a really good one. It's for Mr. Hughes. How do you address issues with employees that you feel may have a problem with use of substance impeding their performance?
Well, like I said, I'm in the food industry, food handler and food safety industry. And if I see you not looking, or you look like a safety hazard, I'm gonna ask you to go home. It's no different than now that we're with COVID testing or whatever, asking if a person has a fever or anything like that. But I can look into your eyes and see if your pupils have dilated, or I can tell if you're clammy or sweaty. I can just look. I've been around a little while, so I can tell when people are out of sorts, if you will.
Okay. Well, this was great information. I'm afraid we are out of time. We would like to thank our panelists, Lisa Kaplan, Marlon Hughes, Wendy Lewis, and Jackie Smith for providing their expertise during this session. We would also like to thank our American Sign Language interpreters, Ms. Mary Rue Dixon and Mandolin George. And also today's virtual session and captioning has been graciously coordinated by Annette Blau of Q&A Reporting, Inc. If you would like additional information, please speak to your MRS counselor. If you do not have an MRS counselor you would like to learn about services, please email Linda Tooks at tooksl@michigan.gov, or you can call her at 313-495-8335. Again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for our participants for attending the session. Please look for information on our next session on retention tips for returning citizens. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.